Good morning. Thank you for watching Ahmed Shakil 5858. I am Ahmed Budna. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by all major American, European, Asian, African, Australian channels and AFP, AP, Reuters news agencies. Now the news in detail. Defense and prosecution made their closing arguments in Hashmani-Trump case. Israel is being condemned by global. The world condemned Israeli actions in Rafah, Gaza. Civil war in Sudan. Millions of people are suffering. President Biden will be nominated for Democratic presidential ticket. USA allowed Cuban businessmen to open account in American banks. North Texas suffered by violent storm. Federal government pledged support for weather-hit areas. TikTok legal battle. Belgium give military support to Ukraine. Putin of Russia warned Western countries of their involvement in Ukraine war. The powers of Taiwan president are cut by the assembly. Betty Nash, the oldest flight attendant, died. Heavy rains in Bangladesh and Brazil. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industrial down, S&P 500 and Nasdaq increase. Now the news in detail.
On this Tuesday night, closing arguments at Donald Trump's historic hush money trial.
I did nothing wrong.
What lawyers told the jury and the message actor Robert De Niro had outside the courthouse for Trump supporters. Gaps in sharing intelligence about foreign interference, but an independent watchdog calls unacceptable. A warning to people in Papua New Guinea's disaster zone.
It's an extraordinarily complicated relief operation.
The next potential threat, and what's interfering with aid efforts. And a $200,000 criminal mystery, the stolen cattle case that's left Quebec police with a lot of questions.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. The fate of former U.S. President Donald Trump could be in the hands of a New York jury by tomorrow. Lawyers for the defense and the prosecution made their final pitch to win over jurors today. 7 men and 5 women will decide whether to convict Trump on charges of falsifying business records, all tied to an alleged hush money scheme to suppress stories before the 2016 election. Jackson Brosco has our top story tonight.
Mr. Trump, how are you doing today?
In the final act of this 6-week saga, Donald Trump entered court defiant.
This is not a trial that should happen. It's a very sad day. This is a dark day in America.
In closing arguments, Trump's defense tried to pivot from salacious allegations about an adult film star, an affair, and hush money payments. This case is about documents. It's a paper case, Trump lawyer Todd Blanche told the jury, cautioning this isn't a referendum on your views on President Trump. Trump's team argued there's no evidence Trump knew how the payments were logged in business records and that the payments were reported to the tax department. The defense then tried to take down the prosecution's star witness Michael Cohen, arguing the convicted liar lied repeatedly on the stand and is out for revenge and personal profit.
He was an essential witness for the prosecution because he's the only person and the only evidence the prosecutors have that really tie former President Trump to the falsification of the business records.
All told, Trump faces 34 felony counts related to the payments. Prosecutors say they were an illegal campaign contribution meant to keep a damaging story from surfacing right before the 2016 election. Trump has argued the checks were for legal services rendered by Cohen.
The question is, are the business records false? I think the prosecution has proven that. The question, though, is, were there in furtherance of or a cover-up another crime? I'm not quite sure the prosecution has gotten there.
In their closing, prosecutors told the jury this is about a conspiracy and a cover-up to corrupt the 2016 election, arguing the case is about far more than an alleged affair. This scheme cooked up by these men at this time could very well be what got President Trump elected, said the prosecutor. After closing arguments will come instructions to the jury before they sit down for deliberations. That part could begin as early as tomorrow. As for how long that could take and whether or not it might be even possible for a jury to reach a verdict, those are the big unknowns here. FARA prosecutors we've been speaking with suggest 3 days at a minimum for deliberations, which would take us through till Friday.
As America holds its breath, Jackson. Now, it got quite political today. After months of ignoring or poking fun at the trial, U.S. President Joe Biden's campaign team sent some of its allies outside the courthouse. What happened there?
That's right. This is a real shift in strategy for the Biden campaign. They've really been ignoring Trump's legal troubles, but today they sent their campaign surrogates here to the courthouse, including actor Robert De Niro, who actually voices Biden's campaign ads, along with several of the officers who successfully defended the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th. All of this is meant to highlight the contrast between Biden and Trump, take advantage of the fact that most of the national media is here outside the courthouse. But far, what Biden might do if Trump is ultimately convicted is a big unknown here. They're really having a hard time navigating an opponent who is so bogged down in the courts.
Jackson Crosco in New York for us tonight. Thank you, Jackson. The United States' former ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, is facing backlash today after reportedly writing the words, "Finish them," on Israeli military missiles. Israeli politician Danny Danon posted a picture of Haley signing IDF artillery shells while in Israel. In the post, Danon says the former U.S. Republican contender included the words, "Finish them," in her signature. The Israeli politician has been accompanying Haley during her trip to Israel this week, where she stressed the U.S. should not be withholding weapons from Israel. To Gaza now. The Hamas-run health ministry says at least 21 people were killed. Dozens of others were injured in a new attack on a tent camp near the city of Rafah. Smoke again billowed over Rafah today, as reports suggest Israeli tanks have for the first time reached the heart of Gaza's southernmost city. Israel's military has denied conducting the latest strike, which hit near the site of Sunday's attack that killed at least 45 Palestinians and fueled international outrage.
April's tragic mistake was the bombing of aid workers providing food to starving Gazans. May's tragic mistake was the bombing of displaced children, parents and families who had fled to a designated safe zone in truly apoplectic scenes. What will June's tragic mistake be? And more importantly, what are we all in this world going to do to stop it?
Crystal Command Singh reports on Israel's growing isolation. On the day 3 European nations officially recognized a Palestinian state.
In Ramallah, a symbolic nod to a symbolic statement by 3 nations recognizing a Palestinian state.
We here in Ireland, we see you. We recognize you. We respect you.
Ireland, Norway, and Spain now recognize the state of Palestine based on borders established before the 1967 war. A push the leaders say will hopefully advance both and the return of hostages.
Is not against anyone, least of all Israel. Furthermore, this decision reflects our absolute rejection of Hamas, a terrorist organization who is against the two-state solution.
When the move was first announced, envoys from the 3 nations were summoned to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, shown images of hostages taken during the Hamas-led October 7th terror attacks. The European leaders hoped other nations would also recognize a Palestinian rejected. More than 130 countries already recognize a Palestinian state. The UK, the US, and Canada do not, but that doesn't mean the plight of civilians goes unnoticed.
The scale of human suffering and tragedy we're seeing in Gaza must cease. Canada in no way supports the military operations by Israel in Rafah.
Israel has repeatedly stated it is fighting for this life, says this woman. Interrupted. Estimated 1 million people have fled Rafah. Amid more strikes and ground forces advancing near the city, people were on the move again, searching for safety. Crystal Command Singh, Global News, London.
A new report from a federal security agency watchdog says there are serious gaps in the way some intelligence was shared in this country between 2018 and 2023. Now, it involves CSIS, the RCMP, and other federal security departments, and shared intelligence about foreign interference by China. As David Aiken reports, it appears CSIS and the information gatekeepers at the Prime Minister's office didn't see eye to eye.
When the spies at CSIS first spotted attempts in 2021 by the government of China to target and intimidate Conservative MP Michael Chong, CSIS put together a briefing of its findings and sent it to those who might be able to do something about it, including then Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. But a new report from the independent watchdog agency charged with oversight of CSIS says that CSIS does not track who actually reads their reports. And in fact, Mendicino would say 2 years later that he first learned about the Chong matter in media reports, not from CSIS. The watchdog agency, it's called the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, or NSIRA, said this is an unacceptable state of affairs, and that the failure by CSIS to document who reads what results in unacceptable gaps in accountability. NSIRA's review was sparked by reports Global News and the Globe and Mail did in 2022, tracing China's foreign interference efforts in Canada, reports based on CSIS sources. CSIS had summarized those efforts in a 2021 briefing for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but neither Trudeau nor his inner circle ever saw that CSIS briefing because the PM's National Security and Intelligence Advisor blocked it, calling it a summary of routine political activity.
If CSIS is investigating it, it has to be clandestine activities, not diplomacy. But the readers of the intelligence are thinking it's just diplomacy, and it's not impressing them enough to go to the Prime Minister, and that's discouraging.
NSIRA says that's a problem, that consumers of CSIS intelligence need better, quote, intelligence literacy.
The people that should be reacting and acting on the intelligence don't share the same view of the people collecting the intelligence and packaging it up, then I think we have a problem.
The government's response, well, it says it is already making many of the improvements NSIRA recommended. The current Public Safety Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, says these days, everybody's reading everything. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. After months of negotiating, Ontario has hammered out a deal with the federal government to unlock hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing.
The agreement that we've been able to finalize today is the bilateral agreement of the National Housing Strategy, which transfers this year $357 million to Ontario in exchange for certain commitments to meeting an overall number of repairs to existing affordable housing, but importantly, adding new additional affordable housing stock as well.
The federal government had said it would bypass the provincial government and give money to the municipalities directly if it didn't meet federal housing targets and have an adequate action plan. There was a history-making moment in the Ontario legislature today. That's New Democrat Sol Mamakwa giving a 10-minute speech in his own language, Oji Cree. It's the first time a language other than English or French has been officially approved in the Ontario legislature. Mamakwa described how colonialism and residential schools contributed to the loss of Indigenous languages in Canada. The speech, he says, recognizes the importance of Indigenous languages in the halls of power. When Mary Simon became Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General in 2021, she was flooded with online hate and harassment. Today, she stopped by our Global News offices in downtown Toronto to talk to us about what that was like.
It does have an effect on you, even if you don't want it to. It does personally affect you, and that was something that I went through, and then my family was affected, and it has a toll on you. both in terms of your emotional well-being and your mental health.
Sanders started a social media campaign called We Deserve Better with the goal of creating a safer online world. Many residents in southwestern Quebec are still in shock after a tornado touched down yesterday. It happened around 5:30 in Rigaud in the afternoon, about 70 kilometers west of Montreal. The twister formed during powerful spring storms that saw up to 80 millimeters of rainfall in some areas. Officials say 4 homes were damaged, but no injuries have been reported. In Papua New Guinea, there are fears of another devastating landslide. Estimates suggest between 670 and 2,000 people could be buried under meters of mud and rock that came down on Friday. Papua New Guinea lies just north of Australia and borders Indonesia. It's nearly as big as Manitoba, with a population of more than 11 million people. It's one of the poorest countries in Oceania. The terrain is remote and it's mountainous, and as Redmond Shannon reports, aid has been very slow to arrive.
Immense grief and immeasurable desperation. Digging to find loved ones as hopes of rescues become tasks of recovery. We will not give up, says this former local politician. Only 6 bodies have been recovered so far. These people are digging despite the dangers. Authorities in Papua New Guinea say Friday's huge landslide that engulfed a village may not be over yet.
My team that were actually at the site yesterday, they said they could even feel the ground moving under them and the ground moving around them.
People in the area are being warned they need to get ready to leave. Alongside the threat of another landslide, drinking water is being contaminated as it flows down through what may be hundreds or even 2,000 bodies. No one is sure.
At the moment, we don't have a good basis for those estimates, and that's the trouble.
Tribal unrest has complicated the aid effort, as has a bridge collapse on the main route to the remote inland location.
We're providing emergency relief supplies, including shelter, hygiene kits and specific support for women and children.
The Canadian government says it's waiting to hear how it can best help.
Depending on the information that we get, we're on standby to provide any humanitarian aid that is necessary.
The UN says more than 7,000 people are affected: the injured, the homeless and the traumatised. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
It has been 1 year since Nova Scotia's destructive wildfires. Coming up, the lessons learned and the improvements residents want to see.
Coke Studio, Season 15.
One year ago, thousands of people in suburban Halifax were forced from their homes by a raging wildfire. Many people lost everything. Heidi Petrachik on the lessons learned.
The memories are strong.
The fire was raging in my backyard. I immediately had to feel like I need to run for my life.
It was snowing ash and needles and debris. Embers were flying around everywhere. The smoke at times would block out the sun.
The flames traveled at breakneck speed as residents of the Upper Tantallon area of Halifax raced for safety. 16,000 people had to flee. The fire destroyed 151 homes.
So this is basically going to be inside here is where the foundation is going to go.
Today, Trisha Murray Dion and Jenny Saunier refocus on rebuilding their homes, along with sharing improvements they'd like to see, like earlier emergency alerts.
To give us a heads up, let us know when we're in danger, to know that we don't have to rely on ourselves to keep ourselves safe.
And better evacuation routes.
Everyone was stuck. We couldn't get out of the subdivision. They ended up cutting the bolts on an ATV trail, and that's how we all evacuated.
99% of our fires here in Nova Scotia are human caused.
No one has been charged in the Upper Tantallon fire, but investigators found careless burning was the cause. Kara McCurdy's goal in her new job as Halifax's wildfire mitigation manager is preventing it from happening again.
We want them to be following the burn restrictions daily. And with Halifax Regional Municipality, you're only allowed to burn until midnight. And people often don't know that.
While she can't control the hot, dry weather that increases fire risk, she is assessing neighborhoods to help minimize destruction.
How close the homes are to the forest, how close they are to one another.
Perhaps the biggest lesson is that it can happen anywhere.
It could start at any point. That's, the really scary part.
And a reality with the 2024 wildfire season underway. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Hammonds Plains, Nova Scotia.
Major kickoff still ahead. The next chapter for Canadian women's soccer is officially unveiled. Welcome to a new era of women's soccer. Today, Project 8, an initiative with one major goal, getting a professional women's soccer league off the ground in Canada, was officially named the Northern Super League, turning a dream into reality.
That the growth of the women's professional sport market internationally is just getting started, and more than that Canada has a role to play in being a leader in women's sport.
Canadian soccer legend and Project 8 co-founder Diana Matheson says the league will kick off in April next year. With a 25-game regular season, it's launching with 6 Canadian teams: Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. Bovine mystery, the case surrounding a massive Quebec cattle heist. Over the years, there have been some rather notable thefts in Quebec. Maple syrup, tons of corn, and even a tiger and 2 camels. The latest happened about 2 hours east of Montreal, and as Mike Armstrong explains, it's a heist that's about as hard to believe as it was to plan.
Les barrières ici étaient déjà fermées. Arriving home last Thursday night, Jonathan Fortin didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The thieves that had visited his farm had closed the gate. Quand j'ai fait mon tour le matin, He says it was when he was making his morning rounds that he noticed the gate was closed differently, and the tire tracks. donc on voit ici les traces du véhicule. Là. Right away, Fortin headed out to his back fields. What he found was something he thought was impossible. All 75 of his cows were gone. Fortin says the thieves herded the animals in the field with a vehicle. It wouldn't have been difficult. The cows would have followed the path they usually take to be fed. But once there, getting dozens and dozens of cows into a truck, or more likely 2 trucks, would have been more complicated. There are people who were organized, he says, they came in a group. Now, it is a massive loss, likely about $200,000, and they weren't insured. It didn't seem necessary. Michel Briand is with the Agricultural Union and says whoever took the cows knew what they were doing. The question is, what can they do with the cows now? Each has 2 earrings identifying where they're from. If they're removed, no abattoir or auction is going to take them. Briand says they're probably in another person's backfield, possibly in another province, while the thieves hope for the heat to die down. Now, police are in contact with Fortin. They're working on some tips, and he hopes he can get his cows back. But the other part of what's upsetting is Fortin knows he was being watched, even followed. The thieves planned the heist for when he'd be away working at a second job, and were gone before he got back. Neighbors did hear some strange noises, but not quite strange enough to look into it. Fortin and his wife now find themselves starting over in a deep financial hole. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Cookshire, Eaton, Quebec.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's your...
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, Israeli forces are continuing to attack Rafah amidst growing outrage over its bombing of a tent camp for displaced Palestinians, which killed 45 people Sunday, including children. Harrowing video emerged showing a man desperately holding up the charred corpse of a headless Palestinian child amidst the still blazing flames of the attack. The Tal al-Sultan neighborhood had been specifically designated as a safe humanitarian area in Rafah. This is Abed Mohammed Alata, whose brother and several other relatives were killed in the attack.
The army is a liar. The occupation army is a liar. There's no security in Gaza. There's no security, not for a child, an elderly man, or for a woman. Here he is with his wife.
They will the World Court. Though the order is legally binding, there is no enforcement mechanism. We'll go to the International Court of Justice after headlines. European heads of state are facing ever louder calls to join Spain, Norway, and Ireland in recognizing Palestinian statehood after Sunday's attack on Rafah. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez spoke earlier today ahead of Spain's official recognition process in a cabinet meeting.
The state of Palestine must be viable, with the West Bank and Gaza connected by a corridor, and with East Jerusalem as its capital, and must be unified under the legitimate government of the Palestine National Authority. Although it is not up to Spain to define the borders of other countries, our position is aligned with the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338, and with the position of the European Union. Therefore, we won't recognize change in the 1967 lines other than those agreed to by the parties.
Ireland and Norway also formalized their recognition of a Palestinian state today. People took to the streets in cities around the world following Sunday's attack on Rafah, including in Paris.
We don't want to be complicit in a crime against humanity. What's happening in Rafah, what's happening in the Gaza Strip is intolerable.
Protests are also continuing on college campuses. At Brown University, President Christina Paxson's commencement speech was interrupted by demonstrators from the group Brown Alumni for Palestine. At the University of Chicago, 4 seniors are being denied their graduation after they participated in Gaza solidarity protests. In Los Angeles, UCLA police have made their first arrest in connection with a violent attack on pro-Palestinian student protesters last month. 18-year-old Edanan is accused of beating protesters with a wooden pole. This comes as unionized academic workers at UCLA and UC Davis are launching a strike action today over violations of their right to free speech. In Canada, the largest university, the University of Toronto, on Monday asked a court to authorize police action to arrest students who defied a deadline to dismantle their encampment. Hundreds of tents have been put up during the weeks-long peaceful protest at the University of Toronto as students demand their school divest from Israel. Reporters Without Borders has lodged another complaint with the International Criminal Court for, quote, war crimes against journalists in Gaza, unquote, where Israel's killed over 100 media workers since October 7th. Reporters Without Borders said, quote, those who kill journalists are attacking the public's right to information, which is even more essential in times of conflict. They must be held accountable, unquote. In Ukraine, at least 18 people, including a 12-year-old child, were killed after a Russian strike on a shopping center in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, Saturday. Dozens of others were injured. It's the deadliest Russian attack in weeks, as Kyiv warns Moscow is preparing to further intensify its offensive along Ukraine's northeastern border. In Papua New Guinea, officials say as many as 2,000 people are feared dead after they were buried alive when a landslide engulfed several villages in the northern Enga province. Thousands of residents have been ordered to evacuate as the landslide is still active. Most of the bodies remain missing as rescue efforts have been hampered by unstable terrain and a blocked-off road.
I have 18 of my family members buried under the debris and soil that I'm standing on, and a lot more family members in the village I cannot count. I'm the landowner here. Thank you to all those who come to help us, but I cannot retrieve the bodies, so I'm standing here helplessly.
At least 23 people were killed while millions of others were left without electricity after Cyclone Ramal ripped through Bangladesh and eastern India Sunday, damaging homes, uprooting trees and destroying power lines. This comes amidst a protracted heat wave across Pakistan and western India. In Pakistan's southern province of Sindh, temperatures have risen to over 125 degrees Fahrenheit. In India, voters face scorching temperatures as the country's 6-week election, the largest in the world, is nearing a close at the end of this week.
It feels like we will die if we step out of our house in this scorching heat to vote for our nation. So that is why I've come here to vote.
In Brazil, officials are warning of the dangerous spread of waterborne disease following catastrophic floods in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. At least 169 people have been killed in the floods, while many others are still missing and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Mexico is now experiencing its third heat wave of the year. Temperatures as high as 113 degrees Fahrenheit are forecast for today across at least two-thirds of Mexico. This comes as water has emerged as a key issue in next Sunday's elections. Mexico City residents have been forced to ration water for months due to a worsening drought that could leave as many as 22 million people without access to water. Officials warn reserves could run dry as soon as late June. Back in the United States, at least 22 people were killed as catastrophic storms and tornadoes swept across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kentucky over the weekend. Meanwhile, over 400,000 people were left without electricity across the eastern U.S. Monday due to severe weather. South Korea, China, and Japan have issued a joint declaration after their first trilateral summit in 4 years. The three nations met in Seoul, in South Korea, amidst rising tensions between Beijing and Washington over trade, Taiwan, and regional influence. This is Chinese Premier Li Qiang.
We will deepen economic trade connectivity, strengthen cooperation in regional industrial and supply chains, and promote the resumption of negotiations on the China-Japan-South Korea free trade agreements.
Ahead of the summit in Seoul, activists gathered to protest Japan's military cooperation with South Korea and its refusal to provide reparations for its sex trafficking of girls and women from countries under its occupation in the Second World War. This is a survivor of Japan's wartime sexual slavery, or so-called comfort woman, 95-year-old Lee Young-soo.
I want to urge Japan to enforce the compensation and resolve the historical issue. And while we are protecting our past, the young should know this history while they visit each other's countries.
At the United Nations Geneva headquarters, negotiators from around the world failed to agree on a treaty that would outline a global strategy to handle the next major pandemic. The treaty, which had been in the works for over 2 years, aimed to establish binding policies for World Health Organization member nations, which includes the United States, on data sharing and enabling equitable access to vaccines and treatments, among other issues. Here in New York, closing arguments are being delivered today in Donald Trump's criminal hush money and election interference trial. Trump's facing 34 felony counts for falsifying business records to cover up payments made to Stormy Daniels in order to protect his 2016 presidential campaign prospects. The jury is expected to begin deliberating on Wednesday. In Georgia, an immigrant from Liberia has died while detained at the notorious Immigration and Customs Enforcement Stewart Detention Center. 44-year-old convert Dennis had been jailed at Stewart since last year. Dennis is believed to be at least the 12th death at Stewart, which is run by the private company CoreCivic. In Texas, families of the victims of the Uvalde massacre filed lawsuits against Meta and Microsoft and the gunmaker Daniel Defense. The 18-year-old mass shooter used a Daniel Defense rifle when he entered Robb Elementary School May 24, 2022, and murdered 19 children and 2 teachers. The family say the Meta-owned Instagram and the Microsoft-owned Activision, which makes the video game Call of Duty, are guilty of marketing the assault-style rifles to teenage boys who play the game, like the Uvalde shooter. The lawsuit argues, quote, these companies are chewing up alienated teenage boys and spitting out mass shooters, unquote. And the United Auto Workers has filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board and requested a new vote for workers at a pair of Mercedes-Benz plants in Alabama. Around 5,000 workers voted against unionizing with the UAW earlier this month after an intense union-busting campaign by Mercedes-Benz, which the union accused of wanton lawlessness. UAW says the company forced workers to sit through anti-union meetings and retaliated against pro-union workers, including through termination. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now's
Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air, the closing arguments right now in Donald Trump's criminal trial. Next, the jury gets this case. Also developing the tornado watch right now and the new danger system sweeping through. And the major building explosion debris raining down, the images coming in now. First tonight, jurors listening intently, Donald Trump looking at the jury, the defense lawyers and the prosecution directly addressing the jury, making their closing arguments, what both sides argued in these final hours. Also tonight, this dangerous system sweeping through with speed and damaging winds. And the tornado watch right now. After deadly storms this holiday, the woman who survived holding onto a doorknob in her home. Ginger Z is here tracking this new threat in the hours ahead. The images coming in tonight, that massive building explosion late today in Youngstown, Ohio. They are trying to account for everyone, first responders racing to the scene. The urgent manhunt tonight for 3 suspects in the killing of a former actor on General Hospital. Authorities believe the actor interrupted them as they were stealing a key part from his car. A part authorities say has valuable metals being stolen and resold. Also just in tonight, a U.S. military jet has gone down in F-35 fighter jet crash. We have news on the pilot's condition. And the other plane crash, 7 people jumping out and surviving. Tonight, Israel intensifying its ground assault on Rafah after that deadly Israeli airstrike that killed 2 Hamas leaders and then ignited a fire on a camp, killing dozens of displaced Palestinians. Back here at home tonight, Jimmy Kimmel's emotional message about his 7-year-old son's 3rd heart surgery. Tonight, the news on Bruce Springsteen, the new message, is now posted. And Diane Sawyer is here tonight, the ABC News exclusive. The sisters of Nicole Brown sitting down with Diane 30 years after Nicole's death. Just weeks now after O.J. Simpson's death, their message now to any family facing down domestic violence and grief.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, it's great to be back with
And then prosecution make their closing arguments in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial.
Israeli tanks reach the center of Rafah as outrage and tensions intensify in the wake of Sunday's deadly strike on a refugee camp.
And Sudan's brutal civil war brings mass killing, torture, and looming famine to millions of people caught in the crossfire. Welcome to the News Hour. In New York City today, both the prosecution and the defense made their final case to jurors in the criminal hush money trial of former President Donald Trump.
Prosecutors reiterated the allegation that Donald Trump falsified business records to conceal news of an alleged affair that could have harmed his chances of becoming president.
In the day's other headlines, President Joe Biden will be formally nominated as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee through a virtual roll call. That's instead of the usual process, which takes place at the party's convention. This year's Democratic National Convention is scheduled to start on August 19th, which comes after Ohio's ballot deadline. In a statement, DNC Chair Jamie Harrison said that this plan will ensure that, quote, Ohioans can exercise their right to vote for the presidential candidate of their choice. The Treasury Department is easing some financial restrictions on Cuba in an effort to boost the island nation's private sector. One of the biggest changes would allow Cuban entrepreneurs to open U.S. bank accounts and access them online. A senior U.S. official told reporters today, quote, we're taking an important step to support the expansion of free enterprise and the expansion of the entrepreneurial business sector in Cuba. Cuban officials have said there are about 11,000 private businesses in Cuba, accounting for roughly 1/3 of the island's employment. Violent storms swept through North Texas this morning, leaving more than 1 million businesses and homes without power. In Dallas, strong winds blew the roof off a hardware store and toppled trees, crushing cars and blocking streets. Golf ball-sized hail pummeled the area late yesterday. It follows a weekend of deadly weather that killed at least 25 people across 7 states. White House officials said today that the FEMA administrator will visit hard-hit Arkansas tomorrow to assess the damage.
The federal government stands ready to support as needed. As we turn towards recovery, we urge residents in the affected areas to remain vigilant and continue listening to state and local officials. We also want to encourage everyone nationwide to prepare now for potential severe weather in your area.
The extreme weather in Texas has also affected the state's primary voting today. Roughly 100 voting sites in Dallas County were knocked offline due to power outages. A U.S. appeals court has fast-tracked the timeline for TikTok's legal battle against the U.S. Justice Department. The social media app is challenging a law requiring its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, to divest its U.S. assets by January of next year or face a ban. The court set oral arguments for September after a group of TikTok creators joined TikTok and the DOJ in asking the court to expedite the process. Turning overseas, Belgium committed $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine a day after Spain pledged the same amount. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sealed the deal in Brussels today, where he toured an airbase. As part of its pledge, Belgium will send 30 F-16 fighter jets to Kyiv. In the meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned European nations against increasing their involvement in the war.
Representatives of NATO countries, especially in Europe, especially in small countries, they must be aware of what they are playing with. They must remember that this is, as a rule, a state with a small territory and a very dense population. And this is a factor that they should keep in mind before talking about striking deep into Russian territory.
Also today, Zelensky signed a $137 million security deal with Portugal. That package includes both military and financial aid. Taiwan's legislature passed a package of bills seen as favorable to China because they limit the powers of the island's president. The changes were pushed by the opposition Nationalist Party, which supports unification with China. During a fiery session in Parliament, lawmakers from the Democratic Progressive Party, which supports independence, protested on the floor and threw garbage bags at the other side. Outside of the chamber, massive crowds gathered to protest the changes. It's unclear whether the bills will make it to the president's desk for final passage. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed after consumer confidence rose in May following 3 months of declines. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 216 points to close at 38,852. The Nasdaq rose nearly 100 points to close above 17,000 for the first time ever, and the S&P 500 ended virtually flat. And we have a unique passing of note. The world's longest-serving flight attendant has died. Betty Nash spent nearly 70 years in the air. She began her career with Eastern Airlines in 1957. Nash died on May 17 following a recent breast cancer diagnosis. She was still employed by American Airlines at the time of her passing. The carrier wrote on social media that Nash, quote, inspired generations of flight attendants. Fly high, Betty. Betty Nash was 88 years old. Still to come on the News Hour, Pope Francis apologizes for using a homophobic slur. A look at President Biden's plans to reform immigration if he wins in November, and how the reclassification of marijuana could change drug enforcement policy.
This is the PBS NewsHour from W.
I would say I'm Maori, and then I would say I'm Pacifica or Polynesian, and Tangata Moana, people of the Pacific Ocean.
Tibble draws parallels between the long voyages her Polynesian forefathers took across the Pacific in canoes and her own travels far from home.
It's not the Pacific Ocean, but you're by water. Water is important to you?
Water definitely says connector between islands, between places, but also between different histories and time.
And she says between herself and other acclaimed indigenous writers she's connected with while in the U.S., like Tommy Orange and Sasha LaPointe.
I just feel like I'm picking up on an ancestral tradition, which was to go and share our knowledge, and then to gain new knowledge and return home with new stories to share.
Stories Tay Tibble says she'll continue to tell through her poetry. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in New York.
And join us again here tomorrow night for Judy Woodruff's look at how Alaska changed its primary elections to break partisan gridlock. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you?
Tonight, the jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial on the verge of getting the case after hearing closing arguments. The former president back in court along with 3 of his children as both sides made their final cases. The prosecution accusing Mr. Trump of trying to illegally influence the 2016 election by covering up a payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. The defense attacking star witness Michael Cohen as, quote, the greatest liar of all time. And the chaos outside the court. Actor Robert De Niro clashing with pro-Trump protesters. Also tonight, severe storm slamming Texas. Flash flooding on the highway in Dallas. Vehicles trapped, a church and homes possibly hit by lightning. Hurricane-force winds pushing a plane away from the gate. More than 1 million without power on the heels of a deadly holiday weekend. The massive explosion at a Chase Bank in Ohio. Debris blowing across the street. Multiple injuries reported. Israeli forces entering the heart of Rafah for the first time. And deadly news strikes as outrage grows over the attack on a tent city that killed 45 people. The new study on preventing peanut allergies in children. What parents need to know. And the needle in a haystack search. The divers on a mission to reunite a couple with a wedding ring lost 25 years ago.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. After 21 days...
To be honest, I expected a little more, but okay. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So yesterday, Americans celebrated Memorial Day, and squad members Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush posted tweets confusing it with Veterans Day. That's still not as bad as when they thought Labor Day was a holiday for pregnant men. But Ilhan reminded us that Memorial Day was still a great weekend to spend with the family and the in-laws, who, in her case, are the same people. She married her brother. I'm not sure, but I think she did. Anyway, according to a new report in Politico, Democrats are in full-blown freak-out about Joe Biden's chances in November. Not about the election, but whether he'll be alive. Terrible. You disgust me. Hillary Clinton is now blaming women for her loss in 2016. Yeah, she tends to do that, responded one observer. Former actor Robert De Niro got into a confrontation outside Donald Trump's New York trial, shouting at a heckler, "You're an effing idiot." De Niro later apologized, saying he thought it was his agent. Bad movie choices. Last week, a biological male won the girls' championship at the Washington State High School track and field meet. He told reporters his secret to winning was pretending he was a girl. At least he's honest. Rashida Tlaib spoke at an event connected to a group of the U.S. regards as a foreign terror organization. However, the group's denouncers and supporters both agreed Tlaib should totally cover her face. I know. I agree. A new study claims the average American spends over 2 hours a day dream scrolling. That is, looking at pictures of things they'd like to own one day. True, I always look at the same thing. You have a problem with it? Don't kink shame. Angel Hernandez, the worst umpire in Major League Baseball, has retired. Yeah. He plans to spend his retirement with a beautiful, luscious, voluptuous blonde. See, he's got bad eyesight. That was the joke. Well, you'll laugh on the way home. Finally, today's National Hamburger Day. To celebrate, guess who insisted on working from home? I get it. All right, can Democrat women leave men alone? Isn't that what we men want, really? Just do our jobs, help when we can, but get out of the way when we're no longer needed. Like an airport wheelchair or an Iranian helicopter. But on The View recently, a collection of angry female Dems pounced on a guy like he was the last free sample at Costco.
Charlemagne, now is not the time, in my opinion, to sit this one out.
Yeah, I didn't say that. I never said I was saying it out. Why do y'all need us to say this if we don't feel comfortable saying it?
No, it's not that we need you to say it. I think other folks need to hear.
The reality is I think both candidates are trash. So because I'm, but I am going to vote in November. I'm going to vote my best interest. And I'm going to vote who I think, can preserve democracy. When you look at somebody like President Biden, it feels like his base is pretty pissed off at him for a number of reasons.
Help him out. Well, no, look, I actually...
Help him out by doing what?
The only way they could have applied more pressure is if they sat on him. But... I mean, no, it's just a natural fact. It's science. But of all people, they should know that you catch more flies with honey because they eat flies. Anyway, it made me wonder if you were a bunch of guys, and I'm still not sure they're not, would they have done the same thing? What if it were a show called The Garage where dudes interview another guy over politics? What would they do if one of them disagreed? Would they harangue him like he came home smelling of cheap perfume with stripper glitter stuck to his face? No, they wouldn't argue for hours or all night. They'd wait till he fell asleep and put his hand in warm water. That's because men just want to help and then be left alone. And the new Democratic Party, a mix of Karens and cucks, driven by too much estrogen across both genders, won't let them. And those who bail on the Dems in favor of Trump, they get called stupid. Listen to Anna Navarro talking about Trump's rally in the Bronx.
There are some Latino immigrants who forget they came here as immigrants and who want to shut the door behind them and who think being anti-immigrant somehow is going to make them pass as more American, pass as whatever. And that's a very stupid attitude to have.
The only people Anna should call stupid are Republican or that her husband's straight. Fact is, I don't know. I just am raising questions. The fact is, the real reason for the shift in numbers from the Democratic Party to Trump, blacks, Hispanics, working class whites, isn't spelled out by the media for good reason. Because it's men leading the exodus. It's not race, it's gender. And it's a race to the exits by men who are fleeing the Democrat Party like it's a bikini car wash full of sixes.
I'd probably say.
Fact is, men don't feel welcome for apparently committing the cardinal sin of actually wanting to be men. And that's only a sin if you're a biological male. If you're a chick who wants a the View would hand you a Jimmy Dean pork sausage, some super glue, and shout, "You go, girl." Disgusting. Because to the woke, there's nothing sexier than a ballerina with a 5 o'clock shadow. But look who's running most of the Trump investigations. Women. And look at the liberal judges coddling criminals. Women. Look at the squad. Women. I know they look like a barbershop quartet from Damascus, but trust me, they're women. And look at Joe Biden. If he has any balls left, they're in a Mason's jar in Jill's shoe closet. Look who's leading the campus protests. Pampered, elite, but unhinged chicks.
We want liberation here! We want liberation here! Say it louder, say it first! No, we want liberation!
Girls, 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 there's enough Hamas for everybody. Usually when I see that many screaming women, it's because Kudlow's robe fell open. But it reminds me of the angry women shouting at people for not wearing masks during COVID, empowered by misdirected anger and newly given authority. Now women are forking over as much as $8 grand for therapy that has them express rage by breaking things. Excuse me, why not just let them drive?
Sexist would say.
Meanwhile, the women who had the support of all women now has turned on them once again. Hillary now blames 2016 on female voters because they expected her to be perfect. Darling, no one expected you to be perfect, only honest, hardworking, and innocent of murder. Now Sonia Sotomayor says she sometimes goes to her chambers and cries after a Supreme Court ruling doesn't go her way. Also when Brett Kavanaugh tells her he just wants to be friends. Bottom line, as the Democratic Party becomes female, the Republican Party becomes more male. But you need men and women together to make things work. Two halves work better as a whole. If it's only men, you get war, crime, pornography, dwarf tossing, often in the same bar. If it's only women, you get terrible laws that excuse the insanity that I just mentioned. But put them together, they make sweet, sweet music. Music that we used to call civilization. So men, keep trying to make that sweet sound. And women, put on a sweater if you're cold. Let's welcome. She comes out shooting if you serve her gluten. Host of Kennedy Saves the World podcast.
On those working to boost gender equity. You can catch the show on France 24 and France24.com.
South Africans head to the polls in the most competitive election since the end of apartheid. Polls suggest the ruling ANC will lose its parliamentary majority for the first time in 30 years. Algeria puts forward a draft resolution at the UN Security Council calling for an end to Israel's military operation in Rafah. The offensive in southern Gaza continues despite international outcry over the killing of 45 people in a camp for displaced Palestinians. And Haiti appoints a new Prime Minister, Gary Conille, nominated to lead the interim government, which has been tasked with restoring order in the face of rampant gang violence and organising elections before February 2026. Well, good evening to you, wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, polling stations open shortly in South Africa for what's expected to be one of the closest elections since the end of apartheid. Opinion polls suggest the ruling African National Congress will fall short of the majority for the first time since Nelson Mandela became president. In 1994, millions turned out for the country's first free and fair election, but turnout has recently declined, particularly among the youth. France 24 looks into why young voters are losing interest in the democratic process their parents thought so harmful.
Education sector, the May 29 elections.
Rinju May, Stefan Kastel and Vincent. Next, Algeria has put forward a draft UN resolution calling for an end to Israel's military operation in Rafah, in southern Gaza. The UN Security Council is currently holding an emergency session after 45 people were killed after an Israeli strike on a camp for displaced Palestinians. A fire broke out following the strike. The Israel Defense Forces said the precision munitions used could not alone have caused the deadly blaze. Despite international outcry, Israel has continued its offensive there. 21 people were reportedly killed at the same camp on Tuesday. Israel denied that shelling from its tanks was responsible. Emerald Maxwell has this update on the situation in Rafah.
Overnight Monday and into Tuesday, Israel continued to bombard Rafah. Residents also say that Israeli tanks have threatened to stop supplying the country with the weapons to do so. On Friday, the International Court of Justice called on Israel to halt its Rafah offensive, an order it has no power to enforce.
Next up, Haiti's Transitional Council has named a new Prime Minister to lead the interim government. Gary Conille is UNICEF's Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean and briefly served as Prime Minister 12 years ago. His nomination comes not quite a month after the council was first formed, amid spiralling gang violence and repeated delays for a long-awaited multinational security force to be led by Kenya. Earlier, I spoke to Keith Mines with the think tank Haiti Network and Vice President of the U.S. Institute of Peace and asked him what this means for Haiti's political process.
Look, there's some positives, some negatives, and some steady things in Haiti right now. The positive is that selection of the Prime Minister. That was the name that many of us had heard would be the best choice for that position. He's got a lot of experience and has a good international understanding. So that was a big step forward. It also indicated the Transitional Council does have the capacity to get things done. That was something people were waiting on, so that's an important move. He's got a lot to do. He's got to round out the rest of the government, get the ministries appointed, directors general, and all in a very urgent time frame. But that was one very positive thing that we've been waiting for quite a while, and it's good to see that happen. My understanding is he's much less connected to some of the actors that people were concerned about. I think he's more apolitical than other of the choices. He's got a certain neutrality. And then his experience with UNICEF is really noteworthy. I mean, he understands both the internal situation in Haiti. I last saw him on my last trip to Haiti, and he was coming in to do some UNICEF work, and really, I think a good leader, and I think someone that will be the right person for the job. Again, huge agenda ahead of him, and there's a lot of negatives right now to match this one positive thing. And there's really always going to be this kind of dance between this temporary council, the transitional council, and the prime minister. But I think this was really as good as it gets.
Next up, Ukraine's president has secured a pledge of F-16 fighter jets from Belgium, but with strings attached. On the second stop of his EU tour, Volodymyr Zelensky signed another long-term bilateral security agreement. It includes 30 of the much-needed warplanes, with the first shipment before the end of this year. But Brussels said they must not be used in Russia. Siobhan Silk tells us more.
Monday, Madrid. Tuesday, Brussels. The Ukrainian president is crisscrossing Europe to seek aid for his country. In the Belgian capital, Volodymyr Zelensky signed a new bilateral security agreement with Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, who has pledged to deliver 30 F-16 jets by 2028. Kyiv has been pleading with allies for the combat planes for months. The first should finally arrive in Ukraine before the end of the year.
Everything which is covered by this agreement is very clear. It is for utilization by the Ukraine Defense Forces on the Ukraine territory.
That's a pressing issue for Ukraine right now. Can it get the green light from its allies to use their weapons on Russian territory? The Belgian Prime Minister's answer is a clear no, but the EU foreign chief told European defence ministers Ukraine does have that right under the rules of war.
Everybody knows what Ukraine needs, so we have to provide it.
While one part of Zelensky's diplomatic mission is boosting Ukraine's defensive and offensive capacity, another part is boosting attendance at a peace conference in Switzerland next month. 160 delegations have been invited, but not Russia. US President Joe Biden is not expected to be among the attendees. Zelensky is urging him to reconsider, saying Biden's absence would be a standing ovation for Vladimir Putin. But Biden isn't the only leader to decline an invitation. China's Xi Jinping and Brazil's Lula are not expected to be there either, as they're skeptical of a peace conference without Russia's participation.
Thousands of Georgians have protested in Tbilisi after lawmakers overturned a presidential veto to pass a controversial foreign influence law. The legislation requires civil society and media groups, which receive over 20% of funding from abroad, to declare they're acting in the interests of a foreign power. Critics say it mirrors a Russian law used to crush dissent, and the European Union has warned it's incompatible with Georgia's bid to join the bloc. Selena Sykes has this update.
84 votes in favor, 4 against. The law has been adopted. Colleagues, thank you. The Georgian parliament has made an important decision.
After weeks of protests and tension in Georgia, a controversial foreign agents bill is set to be signed into law in the coming days. The country's parliament voted to override a presidential veto of the bill, which critics say is authoritarian and Russian-inspired. The decision saw crowds of mainly young protesters, many with EU flags, gather outside parliament in the capital, Tbilisi.
It's just unbelievable that they could turn around Georgia's course and what we've been fighting for and working for 35 years just like this.
We are ready to fight, we are very motivated, and we will never let anyone in this country to take our country to the direction of Russia.
The bill, proposed by the ruling Georgian Dream Party, would require media and NGOs receiving more than 20% of their funding from overseas to register as agents of foreign influence. Opponents say it would restrict media freedom, put onerous restrictions on foreign-funded NGOs, and derail Georgia's path to EU membership. Brussels said that it deeply regrets the Georgian parliament's vote in favour of the bill, and warned that it would hinder the country's efforts to join the bloc. President Salome Zourabichvili, who is increasingly at odds with Georgia's ruling party, now has 5 days to endorse the bill. If she doesn't do so, the parliament speaker will sign it into law.
Finally, closing arguments have wrapped up in Donald Trump's hush money trial in New York. The prosecutor told jurors that the money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels to quiet her claims she'd had sex with Trump was an attempt to deceive the US voter ahead of the 2016 election. Earlier, Trump's lawyers told jurors they shouldn't trust the main witness, Michael Cohen, calling him literally the greatest liar of all time. Critics and supporters of Trump gathered outside the New York courtroom on Tuesday, including one member of Hollywood royalty. Take a look.
Just hoping to God he won't, because I think everybody will regret in such a way, no matter who you are, whether you're big business and you went with Trump or whoever you are, it will affect you in ways that you never could imagine. We are very lucky in this country, and we take it for granted. People thought they could control Hitler. They thought maybe they could control Mussolini. Didn't happen. And other people we don't even know and read about in countries that are less visible. But the same thing happens. A dictator is a dictator. That's what Trump wants to do and be. I'm sorry. There's nothing good about it. Nothing good about it.
Robert Nero expressing his view there of the situation there in US politics. That's it for now here on France 24. Thanks for staying with us on the Night Watch. See you next time.
Hello and welcome to Across Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Our top stories. We'll go to Senegal, where the new government is trying to save the capital seaboard by suspending a wave of development projects. Tunisia's policy towards migrants is drawing international concern. More than 100 migrants were detained in different cities just last week for illegally crossing. One woman is breaking ground in West African music. We follow the first professional female kora player who's shaking up old traditions. All new and ongoing construction works along the coastline of Senegal's capital, Dakar, are now suspended. In recent years, the once beautiful Samia in action.
In the days of the British Empire, things were taken.
The new series,
Ancient Egypt became part of British history.
The diamond was gifted, that diamond was stolen. It's about the theft of history.
Stuff the British stole. June 17 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, police launched a fresh search for missing Ballarat woman Samantha Murphy. The WA Police Commissioner defends his officer's actions in the lead-up to the shooting murder of a woman and her daughter in Perth. Gaza officials say 21 people killed and dozens injured in a tent camp near Rafah. Israel denies attacking the area. And the government on the defensive as the immigration minister comes under fire over his handling of the deportation of criminal offenders. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Catherine Robinson. Police are again searching an area near Ballarat as part of their investigation into the disappearance of Samantha Murphy. Reporter Danny Tran joins us now with the latest. Hi there, Danny. What is the latest from police?
Detectives have today renewed their search for missing Ballarat woman Samantha Murphy. They're looking in a targeted area of Ballarat, but it's unclear where that is. And they tell us that the family is aware of the custody since he was arrested. He will return to court in August and hasn't been required to enter a plea to the murder charge.
Danny Tran, many thanks for the update. Overseas now, Israel's military has denied striking the so-called safe zone near Rafah after Gaza health workers said 21 people were killed by tank fire. And a warning, some viewers may find the following footage distressing. Palestinian officials say more than 60 others were injured in the shelling. Emergency services say the strikes hit Al-Mawasi, which Israel had previously designated as a safe area for Palestinian civilians. The IDF says it didn't shell the area. The fatal strikes follow the deaths of at least 45 Palestinians in a designated area for the displaced in Rafah on Sunday night when a deadly fire broke out after an Israeli airstrike. Israel's defense
that are still being investigated. Our ammunition alone could not have ignited a fire of this size.
Meanwhile, a US-built temporary pier that's been used to get humanitarian aid to Palestinians for less than 2 weeks will be moved from the coast of Gaza for a short time after the US said it was damaged by heavy seas. The pier is one of the few portals for food and other supplies to get into Gaza amid the ongoing conflict. Well, for more on these developments, we're joined by Global Affairs editor John Lyons. John, thanks for your time. What do you make of the IDF's denials here of any involvement in the latest fatal strike on Rafah?
Well, Catherine, it's a complete mystery. The first strike, the fire, of course, the body parts. So it is worse than it's ever been, and sadly, it's getting even worse by the day.
John Lyons, many thanks.
Thank you.
Well, the immigration minister is facing renewed pressure this morning over the reissuing of visas to people with serious criminal convictions who would otherwise be deported. The federal government has argued the Administrative Appeals Tribunal has been misinterpreting a direction from Andrew Giles and allowing the wrong people to remain in Australia. Political reporter Tom Lowry joins me now for more. Tom, Andrew Giles' colleagues have been coming to his defence this morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, Catherine. They have been coming to his defence, left in some uncomfortable situations from time to time in the immigration space, so we probably won't see the pressure let up on this one for some time yet.
Tom Lowry, thank you. The WA police response to family and domestic violence is in the spotlight after a double murder-suicide in Perth's suburbs. The daughter of the gunman says she tried to warn police 3 times and felt let down by their response. Now there's an internal investigation underway. Reporter Kian Berg joins us now from Perth. Good afternoon, Kian. What's the reaction been to Ariel's comments?
Well, really, it's still the search for answers. Ariel raised a range of concerns about the way that police from happening again.
Kian Berg, many thanks. Finance News now, and Alicia Barry joins me in the studio. Alicia, April inflation data is out. It's not going in the right direction.
It's up for the second month in a row. The inflation rate for the month of April has actually risen more than markets were anticipating, up from 3.5% in the March reading to 3.8%.
To insurance giant IAG and the alleged treatment of customers over a 6-year period. And what is alleged to have happened is that customers who are likely to keep on going with their home insurance had this policy applied, this loyalty uplift it's called in the lawsuit, that their premiums were jacked up to a higher rate if they were unlikely to switch insurers. And that was before any of the loyalty discounts that normally apply were put in place. So things like how many years you've been with your insurer, whether you've got multiple policies, and so on. And so Slater
storm and showers there as well. And Darwin, a mostly sunny day with a top of 33. And that is ABC News for now. I'm Catherine Robinson. Thanks for your company. National Press Club is up next, and then we'll be back for more news, sport and weather on the News Channel. We'll see you then.
This is Asia Now.
It is 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. Good morning, I'm Yasmin Yonkers. At this hour, Thailand's Attorney General indicts Thaksin Shinawatra for allegedly insulting the monarchy during an interview in 2015. If found guilty, the former Prime Minister faces a jail term of up to 15 years. 6 people detained in the first use of Hong Kong's Article 23, or national security law. They're found to have posted messages with seditious intent on social media. And 29 people killed in fresh Israeli strikes on Rafah. The UN Security Council met to address a deadly attack that sparked global outcry. And former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra has been indicted for allegedly insulting the monarchy during a newspaper interview which he gave in the year 2015. If found guilty, he could face a jail term of up to 15 years. Mr. Thaksin's lawyer said his client could not appear at Wednesday's hearing due to a COVID-19 infection. Prosecutors have allowed the meeting to be postponed to the 18th of June for him to hear the charges that he faces. The indictment is a setback for the political heavyweight whose loyalists are currently in government. Hong Kong police have made their first arrests under the city's new national security law. Officials say 6 people have been detained for posting messages with seditious intent.
The allegations is about this group of people is using a Facebook page in the social media to advocate hatred against our central government, Hong Kong government, and also our judiciary.
One of the detained has been identified by local media as Chow Hung-tung, a prominent activist who's been jailed since September 2021. She was the former leader of the now disbanded Hong Kong Alliance. The group was known for organizing an annual candlelight vigil in Hong Kong to mourn the victims of the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident. Police said that the homes of the 5 other people arrested were searched and that electronic devices were seized. The detentions were made about 2 months after the city's pro-Beijing legislature passed a new batch of national security laws. The offense carries a maximum penalty of 7 years in prison. Taiwan's government is set to reject a controversial legislation which the opposition passed on parliamentary reforms. The law allows lawmakers greater investigative reach and curbs the powers of the newly elected President William Lai. And lawmakers from the president's Democratic Progressive Party chanting slogans and waving banners in protest during the parliament sessions. Now, these reforms were being pushed by an opposition alliance between Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party. The DPP's William Lai won the presidency in January, but the party lost its majority in parliament. And the DPP has said it will ask the Constitutional Court for an interpretation on the constitutionality of the new laws. The legislation allows lawmakers to summon the president, companies, or even the general public for questioning. And those being questioned are not allowed to, quote, reverse question the lawmakers, an unclear term that is causing unease. Protesters also amassed around the legislative yin, accusing the opposition party of being pro-Beijing amid concerns that China is trying to influence the island's politics. Well, CNA's Victoria Jin was on the streets outside Taiwan's parliament and filed this report.
Behind me, there are tens of thousands of protesters. Even though it's raining, it's drizzling right now, but it didn't stop them from coming out here to voice their opposition and anger against the passage of the reform bills. And of course, they are very upset about what happened, but it has been something that they have been expecting, given the fact that the opposition alliance, the GMT and the Taiwan People's Party, together they hold majority in parliament. So this obviously did not come as a surprise, but they are very critical of the reform bills because they think that they will greatly expand the investigative power of parliament over the government. And this is going to further weaken President William Lai power, and given the fact that he's already a minority president with only 40% of the vote, this is going to definitely make it very difficult for his administration to push through his policies.
他们就是不遵守法治惯来嘛，本来立法的程序，他们就是胡搞瞎打，所以前面对。
基本上我觉得，当然大家现在在这个地方，我们就是反对，就是他出来，就是他不民主的一个程序，但是他其实我觉得他法条内容本身也是非常有问题的，对，因为在台湾五权分立的架构之下，现在的确是让立法院就是权力超过于其他的大院这样子，对，所以现在已经在3读了，我觉得我们应该就是后续会有一些其他的不管是人民的运动，或者是在法治上面我们可以去制衡的地方。
Now that the reform bills have been passed, the president will be required to address the two sides are going to continue over the next 4 years under William Lai's administration.
The world's biggest democratic exercise is entering its final lap. The results of India's marathon 6-week-long election will be revealed next week, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will know if he has achieved what few Indian leaders have, secure a 3rd term in office. CNA's Teresa Tang spoke with Ishan Garg, who shared why this year's poll is unique in the eyes of many voters.
The thing that stands out when you speak generally to voters across the country is what's interesting is that they're now seeing India's elections as more of a presidential form of elections. They're not necessarily thinking about these elections as the party, Janata Party, the BJP, versus the India Alliance. They're thinking about it in terms of Prime Minister Narendra Modi versus who's the opposition party going to put up against him. And we found voters who were mostly impressed by what Prime Minister Modi has done, what he said, and some of the key things that he's done in his 2 terms in office, be it the Ram Temple in Ayodhya or abrogating the special status of the state of Kashmir.
And you can catch the rest of that episode and other behind-the-scenes conversations with our global team of reporters on our CNA podcast. It's called CNA Correspondent, which is available at our website, on CNA or Me Listen apps, and as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. South Africans vote today in the country's hotly contested general election, and polls suggest that for the first time in 30 years, the governing African National Congress, or ANC, could lose the majority vote. It is the party that broke apartheid rules under the late Nelson Mandela. But a crumbling economy, high unemployment, and corruption allegations have already prompted thousands of South Africans living abroad to cast their ballots in overseas voting. Isaac Lukando reports.
At this polling station, some 4,000 kilometers away from home, South Africa's flag flutters in the light Dar es Salaam winds. Though only about 200 South Africans live in Tanzania, many here feel it is important to chime into the political discourse at home.
Feels good to be able to still have a say for back in South Africa, especially if we do wish to return one day and we have loved ones back there.
If you don't vote, you can't argue. So it doesn't matter which party eventually takes the hot seat. If you didn't vote, you can't actually say anything about the party that is there.
According to the South African Electoral Commission, more than 76,000 nationals registered to vote abroad this year, more than double the 30,000 who registered in the last election in 2019. The surge underscores a sense of urgency in what is shaping up to be a watershed election.
30 years after the ruling ANC transformed from a liberation organization to a political party at the end of apartheid in 1994, it faces growing dissatisfaction from South Africans who feel it has failed to live up to its promises. Stubbornly high unemployment, which reached 32% last year, along with persistent economic inequalities, corruption allegations, and frequent power cuts, have reduced its popularity. popularity.
This will be South Africa's 7th election since the end of apartheid in 1994, a time when Nelson Mandela symbolized hope and prosperity for many in the country. But for many young South Africans, the mood has long soured.
I would like to see things getting better, like in terms of we shouldn't be having shortage of electricity. I want to see in future everyone is employed and the corruption gone.
The ANC, besieged by demands for change, is calling on voters to provide a fair assessment of the gains and losses made over the past 30 years. The party's message at home and abroad remains consistent. It is working to address challenges in Africa's leading economy.
If you listen to the South African people in general, they both went up.
Features several notable firsts, including the participation of an unprecedented 70 political parties and the allowance of independent candidates to run for the National Assembly. The most eye-catching of them is the newly formed Umkhonto weSizwe, or MK Party, led by former President Jacob Zuma. Although barred from standing due to a prison sentence, Zuma's enduring popularity could erode the ANC's support base. But analysts say, in reality, the ANC's biggest opponents are the business-friendly Democratic Alliance and the economic freedom fighters who advocate for radical economic changes such as nationalizing industries. Analysts say the ANC has been clawing back voter support in recent weeks and might just squeeze out a narrow victory. But if its vote share drops below 50%, the party will, for the first time, need a coalition partner. And depending on who the ANC picks, analysts say it could either lead to policy continuity and stability or pull the country into choppy, untested waters. Isaac Lukando, CNA, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Papua New Guinea officials say hopes of finding survivors from last week's massive landslide are growing slim. Rescue operations have been hampered by difficult conditions on the ground. A bridge on the key route for getting aid and equipment into the disaster site has collapsed, making it tougher for relief teams to reach the remote area in the northern region. And residents have been digging with shovels and their bare hands for survivors and bodies. Authorities warn the area remains unstable, with debris still falling from the hillside, and 6 bodies have been recovered so far. More than 2,000 are feared dead after being buried under tons of mud and rock. Nearly 8,000 living near the landslide have been evacuated, fearing more earth movements. A long-running tribal conflict has also hindered recovery efforts, and officials say the difficulty in recovering bodies has raised concerns about the outbreak of disease.
Another concern, especially when it comes to health, is because there's so many unrecovered bodies under the rubble.
The Australian Defence Force has been working alongside their colleagues in the PNG Defence Force to support government and relief workers, and we stand ready to do more.
And your Asia Business Update is next, including more property measures from major Chinese cities backed by massive support from the central government. We'll tell you how much of an economic boost is expected. Plus, investors will have to settle their US trades at half the time after Wall Street shifts to faster settlements.
At the heart of the Indian Ocean.
Voters in South Africa are gearing up for the Wednesday vote, which falls 30 years after the country ended apartheid rule, and may be the first time that long-time ruling party African National Congress (ANC) faces losing a majority in parliament. In Johannesburg, Melville neighborhood electoral staff was setting up a polling station ahead of Wednesday vote. Young people are critical vote in this year's election, with 42% of registered voters being under the age of 40. Shamisha Tebogo Popapi, a 21-year student at the University of Joburg, is one of them.
For me, I feel like voting, it brings change because I think for most of us that are in uni now, we've never voted before. So we would like to see something happen, because ever since I existed, I don't know, maybe my parents, I've never seen anything that is of change.
Polls will open Wednesday at 7 a.m. local time, with provisional election results expected in the days to follow. Under South Africa's electoral system, citizens vote for political parties, which then get their share of seats in parliament according to the percentage of the vote received.
Displaced by floods, tens of thousands of students in Somalia's central Hiran region have been forced to stay out of schools. According to Somali education officials, more than 37,000 students in this region in central Somalia are no longer in school due to the impact of recent flooding. Parents of the affected students have also raised concern about long-term impact on the education of their children. Many have appealed to the government to intervene. Last year, the Somali government organized special exams after similar incidents of flooding disrupted the exam timetable. Scientists attribute the heavy rains and relentless flooding to the erratic El Nino weather pattern. Its grip on East Africa has led to a humanitarian crisis after floods also submerged entire areas in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Authorities in Uganda hoped to reach millions of people with a mass vaccination campaign against yellow fever, but vaccine hesitancy has left hundreds of unused doses in hospitals. To date, only 12 million people have been immunized.
It was low in the first week because people were doubting about the vaccine, and they thought, why is the government introducing the campaign of yellow fever? the hard queries are like the government wants to give them expert vaccines.
Uganda launched the mass vaccination campaign in April. There is no specific treatment for the potentially deadly yellow fever virus. There is, however, a vaccine which can give lifetime protection, according to the WHO.
Yellow fever, though you might talk about it, few people may have seen it. May have seen a patient of yellow fever. May have lost a patient of yellow fever. It's not like, for example, like malaria. Malaria, almost every household will know what you're talking about. But the yellow fever is not the same. Although the threat can be bigger. So educating the public is even more difficult. Because if I've not seen the disease, I've not seen a neighbor with the disease, I've not seen, I don't know of anyone who has died of the disease, somehow I have the feeling that I'm not at threat.
There are between 84,000 and 170,000 severe cases of yellow fever in Africa each year.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.